Jill Dougherty is currently a public policy scholar with the Wilson Center's Kennan Institute. During her 3-decade career at CNN, she served in a variety of capacities, including White House Correspondent, Foreign Affairs Correspondent, perhaps most relevant to this discussion, Moscow Bureau Chief.
Right.
Jill, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Tell us about your project here at the Wilson Center. What are you hoping to discover about Vladimir Putin?
Well, Vladimir Putin, it's broader. It's, of course, who he is, what motivates him, where his ideas come from, what he wants to do, what his purpose is. And for that, I have to go back, I think, and explain Russia and when the Soviet Union fell apart, and even way beyond, which brings me personally back to the very first moment that I encountered the Soviet Union, which was way back in the depths of the Cold War, when I was a student. Actually in high school, studying the language. And then luckily in those days, the U.S. government was giving quite a lot of money to study foreign languages
abroad. So you traveled to Russia as a high school student?
Oh yeah, I had 2 stints, one as a summer course, exchange students coming from the United States in St. Petersburg, Leningrad at the time, and then I went back for a whole semester. So I actually survived the winter in Leningrad, which is pretty hard.
So this has been in your blood for a while.
It has, actually since age 13.
Wow. So is there something approaching a Putin ideology? Is it that consistent or coherent, or is it harder to decipher?
You know, there's a debate. There's a roaring debate about that point. I mean, I think it may not be an ideology in the way that, let's say, the Soviet Union had. You know, the Soviet Union basically said to the world, we have a way of life, we have a way of government, we have a society that will improve mankind. And you should do what we're doing, maybe in the circumstances of your own country, but basically communism is the way to the, as they called it, the sветлое будущее, the bright future. And now Russia does not say, we have the way, you know, we know the way, but they do know what they don't want. And so it's like, I would call it kind of a negative ideology, which is the West is essentially corrupt, defunct, weak, and the values that the West has are not values that Russia would ever want to ascribe to. That Russia sits, this is again would be the argument, on a higher moral plane. And so Russia is not telling the world what to do, but it is warning the world away from Western values, away from European and American values, toward an acceptance of whatever values your country has.
That sounds somewhat like repackaging of the old idea, maybe with a more humble approach. We're not providing a template for the world, but we're warning you about the way you might be doing business. And
True, but it's not didactic. I mean, it's not really telling them, okay, here's the plan. Like in the old communist days, you know, you do this and you socialize your industry and you do that, and then you will get to the bright future. What it's saying is, you can pretty much do what you want, but you should not follow what the West and the United States are doing, because after all, they're corrupt, and chances are they probably want to just tell you what to do, you in whatever country it is.
And we certainly give them enough to use for propaganda against, about
true.
Western corruption. What did you learn in your most recent trip to Russia?
I think I learned that there is a concern about the outside world. I found people, even people whom I knew and people from the days not so long ago, a couple of years ago, who seemed more open to the currents of thought around the world, seemed more closed in, more a fortress mentality, the feeling that the United States and certainly NATO were out to get them. And I think I always felt it more of a, let's pull together. It's time to, you know, to pull together to defend us against the West, which is out to get us.
So in Putin's Russia, with this sort of bunker mentality that you're describing forming, is there a way for Russia in any near term to become just another player in the global community? Or as long as Putin's in charge and as long as Russia remains in Ukraine, is that an impossibility?
Boy, those are the big questions, and they're very serious questions because they have to do with European security. Absolutely. Where does Russia fit in Europe? Or in the world, but especially in Europe, does it, these are questions, does it have a right to kind of a zone of influence and maybe even control in the neighborhood of what used to be former Soviet states? Should it be able to dictate to those nations, all of which are independent countries, by the way, how they, what they do, how they work out their security arrangements? Because Russia does not want NATO on its border. That's one of the things that Putin does not want. Now, these are all questions that I don't think anybody really knows the answer to, but it raises really serious issues of how does Russia integrate into the rest of the world? What do young Russians who maybe want to, I don't know, work in Silicon Valley, then go to London for a while, and then come back to Russia, will they still have that longing, or will they want to stay and stay in Moscow?
What will be there for them if they stay?
Exactly.
As far as jobs or education.
Yeah.
A final thought, Jill, and just the difference between learning about something like this as a journalist versus as a scholar. Is it different?
I think a journalist doesn't come to a lot of conclusions. I think journalists
You've
raise
been resisting
questions.
scholarly conclusions.
Exactly,
You're
because
journalistic
maybe
instincts
it's easier to be a journalist. I don't know, but as a journalist, I'm always saying, well, here are the questions, and you can kind of decide. Kind of what I just did with you right now. Here are the questions Putin's looking at. And as a scholar, I think, and especially here at the Wilson Center, where we're trying to provide some guidance to people in the government, to the other think tank world, to just regular citizens who want to understand what's going on in the world, we eventually have to say, what do you think? What do I think? And that is hard.
Are you warming up to that?
I'm warming up to it. I haven't come on my soapbox yet, but I do think that it forces me to be more pointed in what I think about something, based on all of the evidence, everything that I know. What do I think is the right course? And that's challenging.
Well, great. Well, thank you. Yeah. Thanks for joining us. And
thank you, John.
when you're ready for that soapbox,
all right.
we want to hear it.
Okay.
Thanks, Jill.
Mm-hmm.